Hi students, these are video vocab notes for Chapter 28, Section 4, The Russian Revolution. The first section in that reading is called Fall of the Tsar. We need to know what led to the fall of the Tsar and the end of the Romanov dynasty. Remember, this unit follows immediately after World War I, which was absolutely devastating for Russia to the tune of millions of casualties. If you remember the Battle of Tannenberg, they mobilized quickly to everyone's surprise, but they were a little underprepared, and their first encounter with the German army was a really one-sided defeat for the Russians. Also, remember from last unit the concept of total war, where war is fought not just by soldiers, but also by civilians giving all of their labor, all of their effort, all of their resources to the war effort. The result of this total war had left both soldiers and civilians in Russia without food, without fuel, and importantly, without much loyalty to the Tsar. Tsar Nicholas II was pretty unpopular as a ruler. He was an authoritarian in the classic Russian mold, essentially ruling by divine right in much the same way that a medieval monarch would have. Additionally, he was a pretty incompetent ruler. His wife was extremely involved in making decisions for the nation. And they also had, in the royal court, this sort of mystical figure, almost a wizard type, called Grigory Rasputin. And they both consulted him as a sort of a spiritual advisor for decision-making for the Russian state, which drove the public a little crazy. In 1917, the people of Russia rioted in the capital city of Petrograd, and Tsar Nicholas II gave up his throne. He abdicated, which is the word that means to surrender your crown or give up your throne. In March of 1917, it's February by the calendar that the Russians were using at the time, and that is known as the February Revolution. It brought an end to the Romanov dynasty, which had been in power. That Romanov family had been in power in Russia for on the order of 300 years. The Tsar's rule was replaced by a provisional government. It was supposed to be a temporary government, just in power long enough to organize elections. So two powerful factions sort of stepped up after the Tsar relinquished his rule of Russia. The provisional government itself was sort of a Republican government. They meant to elect a Republican assembly. They were pursuing a modern democracy, as much of Western Europe had. They were just intended to provide some temporary stability while they organized the elections. The other group that rose to power was the Soviet, and this is a council representing workers, soldiers, other members of the working class. There were small local Soviets all over Russia, but the Soviet in the capital city of Petrograd was large and powerful. Together, the provisional government and the Soviet sort of took over government of Russia in the Tsar's absence. One of the main leaders during this time was a moderate socialist, Alexander Kerensky. He came to power in both of those governing bodies. He was influential in the provisional government and also held quite a bit of power in the Petrograd Soviet. As these Soviets, or workers' councils all over Russia, formed and grew and gained power, they began demanding quite loudly peace, a withdrawal from World War I, and economic reforms for the people of Russia. As these Soviets gained power, the provisional government lost power. The next section in 28.4 is about Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, and his role in the Russian Revolution. In these Soviets, or workers' councils, you could find two types of socialists, or sort of two parties. The majority within any given Soviet were the moderates, the Mensheviks. They thought socialism would take time and effort and would need to be the work of the people. They thought that the leaders could not pull off the revolution without the support of the masses of the Russian population. And they thought that socialism would sort of gradually inspire the people of Russia. However, a small minority were the more radical Bolsheviks. They wanted to create a socialist government quickly, forcefully if necessary, and importantly, globally. They thought that the socialist revolution and Marx's ideas needed to spread beyond Russia. These two groups, the moderate Mensheviks and the radical Bolsheviks, split power on any given Soviet, including the large, powerful Petrograd Soviet in the capital. If you remember, during the French Revolution, we saw a similar thing. The moderate Girondists and the more radical Jacobins sort of shared power in the French revolutionary government. Vladimir Lenin was a Bolshevik. He was one of the more radical sorts. He'd actually been exiled in Germany. The Tsar, Nicholas II, had thrown him out of Russia because he was too much of a radical socialist. He wanted to put the ideas of Karl Marx into action in Russia, and that sort of challenge to his authority couldn't be tolerated by the Tsar. He'd been exiled in Germany, and actually the Germans helped him get back home to Russia during World War I, simply because they knew that if Lenin could return to Russia, he would try to begin a socialist revolution, which could ultimately eliminate Russia from World War I, allowing Germany to focus on defeating Britain and France. Lenin's plan, should he pull off this revolution he was imagining, was for immediate peace with Germany and to put the Soviets, the workers' councils, in direct control of the Russian government. Now, there's a second revolution here in this story. The February Revolution that overthrows the Tsar is not the only revolution in Russia. The Bolshevik Revolution, the October Revolution, follows the first one. As time goes on, the more radical Bolshevik Party starts to gain power within those Soviets. With every election that passes, more and more Bolsheviks win seats on the councils, and fewer moderate Mensheviks have that seat and that voice. Along with the military, which was discouraged from extensive defeats and heavy losses in World War I, the Bolsheviks eventually overthrow the provisional government that has just overthrown the Tsar. This happens in November of 1917. By the Russian calendar at the time, it is the October Revolution. So you've got the February Revolution and the October Revolution, which happened in March and November, confusingly. The elected assembly that Alexander Kerensky had helped to put together, the one that is supposed to organize new elections and provide more of a democratic Republican government, that when they hold those elections, it results in a Bolshevik minority. It's the Mensheviks and the Democrats and other parties who have most of the power on the elected assembly. So the Bolsheviks see to it that that elected assembly is disbanded soon after it comes into existence. This brings Russia, after two revolutions in 1917, to a new political order, communism. Lenin is in power. The Bolsheviks and the Soviets, the workers' councils, dominate Russian government. And their aims immediately, in addition to removing Russia from World War I, is to eliminate private property and to transform Russia into a nation in which farms and factories are run by workers. This is Karl Marx's idea now finally being put into practice. Decades after Marx first devised it, Lenin and the Bolsheviks are ready to put it to the test in Russia. Finally, you've got the Russian Civil War. Lenin and the Bolsheviks do not have easy and clear control. There's opposition within Russia, and it results in a civil war that lasts for several years. One of the first things Lenin does is he does make peace with Germany through the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which is going to allow him to focus on building this new communist nation of his. The Reds in the Civil War are the communists. They are the Bolsheviks. They're the radicals. Politically, they're led by Vladimir Lenin, and their military leader is Leon Trotsky. The other side in the Civil War, ultimately the losing side, is sort of everybody else. They're known as the whites, and they include more moderate socialists, not so radical as the Bolsheviks, but who still want to see socialism work. These are the Mensheviks. Also royalists, anyone who wanted to see the Tsar back in power. Liberal reformers, Democrats, anyone who wants to see a more modern democratic republic. The losing side is this sort of mixed bag of socialists and royalists and Republicans, and they called themselves the whites. Ultimately, they lose the Russian Civil War, possibly because they were so scattered and mixed, and the reds, the communists, come out on top. Once the communists are firmly in power, they pretty violently eliminate any opposition. They take total control of the economy of Russia, and they restrict the influence of the church as well. They basically want to eliminate anyone who could challenge the communist government for influence in Russia. By 1922, opposition has been eliminated, the whites have been defeated, and Lenin and the communists are securely in control of Russia.